Jesus is arrested on purpose? Let's check it out. All right, welcome back to 2:15. Today we'll be in John chapter 18, and this is actually the 20th episode in our Gospel of John series. So if you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, I'll leave a link in the description. You can check them out there and come on back and we'll get started. So John chapter 18, it begins as Jesus and 11 of the 12 disciples have just completed the Last Supper, and Jesus has also finished a discourse with them, preparing them for his soon coming betrayal, arrest, and death. And with the time for these events now arriving, we see as Jesus begins these final hours. Let's pick it up. Verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden in which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So while it would have normally seemed to be a point that could be easily missed, the text states that he and his disciples went over the ravine of the Kidron. Historically speaking, this particular ravine is said to have contained a brook which flowed from the temple. With this being the Passover season, it's said that this particular brook would have even been at this time red with the blood from Passover sacrifices. In a certain way, this would have served as yet another reminder to Jesus about what he was to endure as our ultimate sacrifice, the Lamb of God. That said, Jesus and the disciples continued along this path as they made their way to the garden. While John doesn't identify the name of this location in particular, we know from Matthew and Mark's gospel accounts that this was known as Gethsemane. The text states that this garden was well known by the disciples and that even Judas was familiar with it. Even in the face of what was about to happen to him, Jesus didn't shy away from it. He just as easily could have chosen anywhere else to go and in some sense hide. Instead, he proceeded willingly, choosing to go with the disciples to the very place he knew his pursuers would find him, the Garden of Gethsemane. Verse 3. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. So it's fascinating and it's perhaps even puzzling that it's stated here that Judas came with Roman soldiers and officers from the chief priests. And they came armed with torches and weapons as if to expect some large conflict. All of this serves to further emphasize Judas's lack of understanding in regard to Jesus. He had no intent to struggle or attempt to avoid being arrested and taken into captivity. And he had no intent to present any sort of physical confrontation in the midst of all this. Judas, having traveled with Jesus over the course of his earthly ministry, had every opportunity to see and know this about him as he actively avoided appearance or even notion that he would lead some form of physical rebellion, much less one that primarily would have relied on violence. On the other hand, Judas also misunderstood Jesus' power as well. You see, if his intent had been to physically resist arrest, there would be no amount of soldiers or weapons that could possibly stand in his way. Furthermore, the text here, it states that they also came with lanterns, as if they believed they would need to search for him, as if to take him by surprise. Jesus, however, was fully aware of their plan and what was to come. Nothing about it took him by surprise. Truly, Judas misunderstood Jesus on multiple accounts. Verse 4. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way, to fulfill the word which he spoke. Of those whom you have given me, I lost not one." So in Jesus' willingness to lead in this situation, he asks them, "Whom do you seek?" And we see that he was attempting to protect the disciples by identifying himself as the target of this mob. Even now, Jesus' concern was not of his own well-being, but that of others first and foremost. That said, the pursuers answer, confirming aloud that they sought to arrest him. Jesus the Nazarene, they state. Also, in turn, it served to announce the evil which they intended to perpetrate. As Jesus responds to this inquiry, the text states that the men drew back and fell to the ground. And while there's no clear reason given in the text as to why this happened, there are a few lines of thought that are usually brought up. In a supernatural sense, some consider the possibility that Jesus displayed, even just for a moment, a glimpse at his true power and ability, showing in yet another way that while he could successfully resist, he chose not to do so. In another way, it's also possible that Jesus' reaction was not what the guards had expected. Undoubtedly, in their minds, Jesus was but a mere man. Their expectation would not have been for him to boldly and willingly identify himself, walking directly into their trap. Rather, they would have expected him to resist, attempt to flee, or to even cower in fear. All of Jesus' life had led to this. He was submitted to the will of the Father, and so he continued forward in obedience. Verse 10. Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Some debate surrounds Peter's attacking the servant and cutting off his ear. In particular, because of the specification in the text that it was the right ear of the servant, some have suggested that the possibility that Peter, most likely being right-handed and fighting as such, would have an almost impossible task of attacking the servant and cutting off his right ear if they were face to face. This has led some to the possibility that Peter attacked the servant from behind. In some ways, it would have been an act of cowardice, but also it would have made his right ear more accessible. All of that said, and whether or not this idea were to prove true, it was not Jesus' intention to begin a physical confrontation or for anyone to be injured. And so he commands Peter to put his sword away, stating, "The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Jesus had full intention of cooperating and submitting to the will of the Father. As another point of interest, the text specifies the name of this servant, Malchus. And while it's not known for sure, it's entirely possible that this man may have become a Christian at some point. It was really common for the gospel writers to refer to individuals by name if they were someone that would have been recognized by those of the early church. This also lends itself to the validity of the scriptures. These individuals would have served as further witnesses and references attesting to the validity of the recorded events. The Gospel of Luke, it also includes a bit of information regarding Malchus that may lend itself to this idea that he may have come to believe in Jesus. Luke chapter 22, verse 49 and 51 is where we can see that. When those who were around him saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answered and said, "Stop, no more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. So Jesus, he ordering the violence to stop, he healed Malchus. And this was one who came against an armed mob to arrest him in order to bring him to trial by restoring his ear. Continue on back in the Gospel of John, verse 12. So the Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and led him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people. Jesus, now placed in bonds, is first led to Annas. And while Annas wasn't officially high priest that year, historically speaking, he did serve from 6 to 15 AD. And he continued to hold tremendous influence even after being removed from the office. Furthermore, historians recount that 4 of his sons had served as high priest, and his son-in-law, Caiaphas, who we were introduced to in chapter 11, now held the position. All of that said, influential as Annas was, even without being the official high priest, he was still in a position of power and authority, having placed all of these men in power during his time. Meanwhile, we see as Peter encounters individuals accusing him of being a Christ follower. Verse 15. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves. And Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. The unnamed disciple that's mentioned here in verse 15 is commonly believed to be John himself, who apparently had some form of connection with the household of the high priest, as the text mentions. Undoubtedly, this explains the means by which they were able to gain entrance. As Peter and John enter, the slave girl asks, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" It's quite possible that by her use of the word also, she's indicating that she is aware of John's allegiances with Jesus. Peter, however, beginning the fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy from chapter 16, answers in the negative, denying that he is a follower of Christ. The attention of the text then turns back to Jesus once more as he's questioned by Annas. Verse 19. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together, and I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. They know what I said." Despite the pretense of the high priest's questioning regarding his teaching and his disciples, Jesus mentioned that his teachings were not revealed in secret. He's been upfront and public regarding who he claimed to be, often teaching in the temple and the synagogues, much as he mentioned. For the high priest to speak as though he was unaware of, at the very least, even the rumors surrounding Jesus, seems to indicate that he was either attempting to trap Jesus in his words, he was either trying to trap Jesus, pretending, or he was truly so far removed from everyday society as to be unaware of Jesus. In any case, Jesus was correct in pointing out that they could question a large group of the Jewish population regarding what he had taught. His teachings weren't secret weren't secret knowledge. In many ways, this flies in the face of much of the Gnostic ideas that circulated during the times of the early church. Much of Christian Gnosticism held the idea that Jesus had imparted certain secret knowledge to a privileged few people that would lead them to eternal life. This secret knowledge would then be utilized to foist some form of heretical agenda on those who embrace their doctrines. Yet we see that Jesus here, he was open and honest regarding his teachings. Verse 22. When he had said this, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. With this, we see the first strike laid upon Jesus, and it would serve as a precursor to the many blows that were yet to follow. This officer chastises Jesus for what they consider to be disrespect. However, this truly illuminates the servanthood and humility of Jesus. Jesus, being God in the flesh, he was far superior in rank than that of even Annas. Yet, rather than argue in return, asserting his deity, Jesus simply points the hearers back to the evidence of his words and actions over the course of his ministry. All that said, the text returns back to Peter. Verse 25. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. So as if to sort of rip off the bandage, the writer includes Peter's final two denials together, resulting in the immediate rooster crow to serve as the reminder to him of Jesus' prediction in chapter 13. The text notes that one of the individuals questioning him was a relative of Malchus, the slave whose ear Peter cut off. And to make matters even worse, this individual was claiming to have recognized Peter from the garden where this incident took place. So it's quite possible that Peter's denial of Jesus was further fueled by the fear of retribution from this relative of Malchus. All in all, we see that even though he claimed to be willing to follow Jesus to the death, Peter was unwilling at this point to truly be associated with him in the midst of such tribulation. Verse 28. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. The irony here cannot be denied. The Jewish leaders were so concerned with remaining ritually pure so that they could participate in Passover that they were unwilling to even enter into the praetorium, the home of Pilate. The Jewish leadership at the time taught and held the belief that to enter the home of a Gentile, someone who would have been unclean would render the Jew in this scenario unclean as well. The irony in all of it was simply that though they were concerned about being defiled by being present in the home of a Gentile, they were unconcerned about breaking their own trial laws, accusing an innocent man, much less their Messiah, having him arrested and put to death unjustifiably. They were more concerned with how it would look if they were unable to participate in Passover than they were about murdering an innocent man. Verse 29. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death, to fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying what kind of death he was about to die." As was characteristic of a Roman, Pilate was direct in his questioning. What accusation do you bring against this man? The Jews, however, in their response, displayed quite the opposite. Rather than answering the question, they deliver a flippant statement. If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. However, this in fact was patently false. Jesus wasn't an evildoer. He was completely innocent, and yet they have brought him before the Romans for trial. The truth of the matter is they couldn't articulate an accusation to give to Pilate because they had no accusation to bring against him that would have been in violation of Roman law and thus worthy of a Roman death. Their accusation was that Jesus claimed to be God. They were charging him unjustifiably with blasphemy, not something that would have mattered to the Romans. All of this in mind, Pilate responds to the Jews, telling them to judge him according to their law, leading the Jewish leaders to state and show their true intentions, where they state, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." You see, they weren't at any point interested in a fair trial, or else Jesus wouldn't be on trial in the first place. Yes, he claimed to be the Son of God, but it wasn't blasphemous because he truly was the Son of God and presented the evidence needed. Furthermore, though, they weren't interested in mere imprisonment or even just scourging as punishment. Their goal was to, in their minds, dispose of Jesus by death. To them, nothing less would be sufficient. Verse 33. Therefore, Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" As Pilate inquired of Jesus as to whether or not he held the title of King of the Jews, Jesus answered the inquiry asking, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" At this point in history, power in the region was in a precarious balance between the Jews and Rome. Essentially, with Israel being under Roman rule, the Jews held as much self-governance and authority as Rome allowed them to have. If Pilate was asking on his own initiative, that is, simply because he truly wished to know, his question would hold a sense of inquiry regarding a threat to Roman authority. On the other hand, if Pilate was asking this question on behalf of Caiaphas, it would serve as an inquiry as to whether he was the Jewish Messiah, the coming king of the Jews. Pilate responds with the statement, "I am not a Jew, am I?" Essentially saying, I am not Jewish and couldn't care less about your political and religious squabbles. Pilate raises the question to him, however, what have you done? And specifically, he was seeking for what he had done wrong. What drew the ire of the Jews? Even just within this gospel account, Jesus had healed the blind, paralyzed, and the sick. He raised the dead. He claimed to be the Son of God and demonstrated as much by living a perfect and sinless life. And all of it served to demonstrate that indeed Jesus was the King of the Jews and the coming Messiah. That's what Jesus had done. Verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." In some ways, this response, while it may have sounded far-fetched to Pilate, it also likely came as a relief to him as well. Surely over the years of his rule in the Roman Empire, he had seen many revolutionaries claiming to be king. Jesus, however, did not fit into the same box or the same mold as those that Pilate had encountered before. He was entirely different, and it was abundantly clear. Jesus pointed to the true nature of the kingdom of God, not in military might or strength, nor in great physical wealth. Rather, his kingdom is not of this world, and so it holds a very different nature than what Pilate would have been used to. The Romans held great pride in their military might and brutality, yet Jesus' kingdom is built upon his servanthood and sacrifice on the cross. Verse 37. Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you the King of the Jews?" So they cried out again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. So while Jesus confirmed that he was indeed a king, he emphasizes that much like the nature of his kingdom was different than Pilate would have expected, so was the nature of his kingship as well. Jesus' kingship is that of far beyond mere physical land or territory and greater than political strength. His kingship is a kingship of truth. In response to this, however, Pilate responds with the question, what is truth? Much like the world today, Pilate considered truth to be as Rome defined it to be. Rome saw truth as being found and proven in vast conquest and military prowess. To him, Caesar was truth. So in his eyes, for Jesus to claim to be a king of truth was foolishness. After his discourse with Jesus, Pilate draws the conclusion and relays to the Jews, not that Jesus was simply not guilty, but rather that he found no guilt in him. In a certain way, this proved to be even more observant than the Jews themselves, who were so blinded by their hatred of Jesus that they would not see his innocence. With this in mind, believing Jesus to be innocent, but also wanting to retain some sense of balance with the Jews, Pilate offers them the custom to which he referred, that he would release someone for them at the Passover. This gave the public the option to choose the release of Jesus. Yet instead, these same people that less than a week earlier proclaimed Jesus to be king, shouting Hosanna in the streets, now they call for Barabbas to be released instead. Next time we'll begin John chapter 19 as Jesus' trial reaches its climax, resulting in his scourging. Please consider subscribing to stay up to date as new studies are released. I pray that that they will serve to help you grow and deepen your walk with the Lord. Thanks for watching.